In the past month, week and a half ago, as a matter of fact, someone threatened to kill me in the course of my work. Threatened to kill me. That has never happened before. It was startling. It was unsettling. It was during a phone conversation, and I have never had someone literally threaten to kill me ever. I don't recall that happening. And I've had some people be pretty angry at me. They might have thought it, but to actually say it to me was disturbing. And yet that is not the most disturbing thing that's happened in the past month. And that's how things are right now. That's the world we're living in, that globally we are in such a crisis. We are in such a crisis of health. We are in such a crisis of consciousness. We are in such a crisis of race relations. We are in such a tumultuous time that someone threatening to kill me was not the worst part of my past few weeks. There's been so much. Racism. Racism is something I've dealt with my entire life, like sexism. And I, at one point, thought it was worse because I grew up in the South, in the Bible Belt, with its history, the pastoral South, with this history of racism and slavery. But it's not. I now see, the world now sees, with the death on May 25th of George Floyd and the protests that began on May 26th and continue around the world with example after example of bias and racism. The world now sees this is not at all a Southern thing. It is a disease. It is a terrible, terrible disease, and I don't know that there's a scientist anywhere trying to work on a cure for racism. Violence is a symptom. They're working on that. There's militarization of the police department, rubber bullets hitting innocent people who aren't doing anything. And per an online article I read, 538 is the website, 63% of whites and 91% of blacks believe that race had something to do with the execution of George Floyd on May 25th for the longest 8 minutes and 46 seconds of our lives, having to watch that man being handcuffed. I'm just raw. I can't even follow this little script I tried to write out emotionally. I've been trying to come up with something to say for over a month. My last podcast was May 18th. It is June 14th, and I am just now able to speak in a somewhat public way about this. There have been lots of conversations, Zoom conversations, text calls, lots of crying. I have never seen this amount of lamenting among the African American population, my friends from every socioeconomic group, every part of the country, just broken by what we've seen. And you have to understand that what happened to George Floyd, what was new about it was that Darnella Frazier stood there and recorded all 8 minutes and 46 seconds of his execution. She recorded a man in handcuffs with men on his back, holding down his legs, and a police officer with his knee on his neck, as he begged for his life. You don't need me to recall in more painstaking detail what we saw then. It's just that, what was different, I heard Ava DuVernay point out that usually we're looking from a body cam. And in this instance, we were able to see the entitlement, I don't know what that was, on the officer's face with his knee on George Floyd's neck, but it was painful and horrible for Mr. Floyd, and it is painful and horrible to watch, knowing that we've seen it so many times before, that blacks, African Americans, are killed at a much higher, disproportionately higher, outrageously higher rate than white Americans, than Americans of other colors, for nonviolent offenses. And before that, it was Ahmaud Arbery jogging, a 25-year-old jogging, not bothering anybody, corralled on the highway by men in a truck who were videotaping it as if it were sport, outright killed him and almost got away with killing that young man. And then Breonna Taylor, killed in her home sleeping because of a no-knock policy that resulted in her death at home sleeping. And it's just over and over. This is not new to Black America. The only thing new is the video cameras, the evidence. Now, if you are new to Dr. Mo Anderson, new to my podcast, new to my work, please visit my website and see that I have spent much of my life working in the community, working with law enforcement. I am a healthcare provider. I would call 911 in a heartbeat if I need help, and I would help anyone of any race, any ethnicity, any socioeconomic group that is within my ability to help. That's who I am. My resume, my history speaks for itself in regards to how I relate to other human beings as a Christian, as a mother, as a healthcare provider. I don't always get it right, but I very much try to treat people the way I'd like to be treated. I have a lot of diversity in my life. And I mean, this is one thing that bothers me. All these people who say they haven't seen racism, they're not aware of discrimination, it's never impacted them, and they live in America. And a lot of these are my colleagues, and I'm like, you going to conferences, entire conferences, large rooms full of people, you don't see any African Americans, and this is across the board with professions. You go to church, you see one or two or no African American. You've lived in communities where you see no African Americans, no people of color, the country clubs, the movies, the commercials. When I first got emojis on my phone, there wasn't even a little black hand so I could do thumbs up or okay in a tone that looked anything like me. I remember Julia when that program came on television when I was a young girl. That was the first African American I'd seen on television that wasn't a maid or a slave. You have seen it. It is so inherent, so ingrained in our culture, from education to political representation and redlining to hiring bias by someone's very name they may not get. I have people I know who go by initials because of the nature of their name being African American. They would not even get an interview. Banks lending practices, this is all documented statistically over and over again, researched, and it's like, what else do we have to do to get people to see that systemic racism, which is why I'm naming all these areas of disparity, socioeconomic, so that coronavirus is now impacting African Americans more largely because so many do not have health care. You have seen it. It's just gotten to be a way of life. So when you say to us, I'm not aware of it, it's never impacted me, I just don't see how. What are you looking at? Where have you been? Because we've been screaming for our mamas and yelling for help for 400 years. And when people say to me, I've gotten well-meaning texts and calls from friends saying, Mo, I see changes. It's just going to take some time. And, people are coming around. We don't have time, folks. We were brought over here in the 1600s. It is 2020. We don't have time. We need change now. 2 men were hung this past week. Hung. And I do not believe it was a suicide any more than I believe Sandra Bland was a suicide. We are going backwards, beyond the 50s and 60s civil rights movement when my mom was attacked with dogs and hosed with water hoses intended to put out 4-alarm fires, marching and protesting about the very thing I'm protesting now about, and praying to God that my young grandchildren, my sons even, won't have to be protesting this again 40 years from now. If there's one thing that has bothered me most greatly, it is, there's not one thing, there's so much. There is so much. I have prayed so much and thought so much and puzzled so much. It's the information is there. The books are there. Netflix and YouTube and Amazon have put up videos of black movies if you want to learn more about racism, the Central Park 5, Harriet 13th. Those are not new movies. These are not new instances in history. I'm glad they're up there, but it's all been here. So if you want to be an ally, just take the time to educate yourself about our history, about American history, which includes black history. There's no separate black history, which is why a lot of people object to Black History Month, those 28 days where we talk about black history. Black history is inherent in American history. If you take black history away, if you really, really look at black history, the inventions and innovations, entertainment, great, but far and way beyond that, what African Americans have contributed to this country, if you take that away, there is no America. There is no America. And that can be said for all groups. I'm certain Native Americans, Asian Americans have made very important, white Americans have made very important contributions to this country, but don't separate us out and don't ignore the tragedies of injustice that have been done to us because it didn't happen in your house or in your office. We are intertwined. We have a common fate. So what I was about to say is, if I get one more text saying I don't condone looting, I don't condone looting. I don't condone looting. How has that gotten to be the subject matter? I see a man dying in the street for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I see a building on fire. My attention is first going to the dying man, to the dying men and women, because there was no looting before George Floyd was killed in front of the world in the middle of the day, in the middle of the street. No one was looting. That is a distraction. That is something shiny. And I do not need someone telling me they don't condone looting. I don't condone looting. Do you think because we're seeing this racism manifest all over the world that we condone looting? Most of the protesters are peaceful, and it just bugs me that we even have to say that. Because that, again, is out there if you want to look and not just see what you want to see. Most of the protesters are peaceful. I've marched in Dallas. I've marched in Grand Prairie, Texas, where I live, where there were apparently effigies at the high school a few decades ago, but 2,000 of us of all genders and ages and ethnicities marched together in support of reforms and an end policing reforms and into racism, reforms across the board to stop this systemic, meaning that it's in our blood, systemic racism. I'm a dentist. When people come to me and they've tried to treat a toothache at home when I was in clinical practice, and they tell me over and over again the oral gel was working, the tea bag was working, but then it stopped. And I would tell them that's because you're trying to treat pathology, a systemic problem, with a topical solution. Shooting at protesters who are not violent, talking about looting, justifying killing a man who was sleeping in a car at Wendy's, which, by the way, was a prank that some frat boys did when I was in college at Baylor. That doesn't take away from the fact that people are being killed for nonviolent offenses or no offense at all. That is why we are so upset. That is why your black friends are so hurt. And that is why I don't want to hear about looting. I don't want people looting because it is distracting from the message. And I am a business owner. I don't want anybody destroying my property. But that is not the vast majority of the people. To us, it seems like it's just an excuse to keep from facing the race issue. So if one of my friends came to me and said, "Oh my goodness, Mo, you know, someone broke into our home and they stole everything. They took the PC, they took the dog food, they cleaned us out, and then they beat my father to a pulp and left him in the floor of the den, nearly dead." Can you believe that? The first thing out of my mouth would not be the inhumane treatment of dogs is bad. The first thing out of my mouth would not be stealing is bad. And it is. The first thing out of my mouth would be, how is your father? I would be concerned about his welfare. George Floyd could be my father. He could be my son. He could be my uncle, all of whom have been stopped for driving while black. And you ask me about a building first. You talk about looting. I have nothing to do with that. Nobody condones it. We never have. And I just am insulted by that comment to me from friends who know me, as if, stop saying that. Nobody likes looting, but more so, I don't like seeing people killed, handcuffed, and choked to death, lynched. I don't like seeing that more. That inhumane treatment of a fellow human being. So yeah, I'm just raw. The racial terrorism, the cultural paralysis. It is time for us to turn the corner. It is time for us to take a new direction. It is time for us to have some difficult conversations with ourselves, some personal reflection. I just saw where it said and if I'm repeating myself, so I am. 75% of white Americans don't have a black friend. We're 12% of the population. Hardly any of us in some areas. I can see that. But if you're not in one of those areas and you don't have a black friend and you want to be an ally and contribute to solving this problem, that might be a place to start. Why don't you have some diversity in your life? Just friends of color. And I don't mean, there are people who sit by me in a conference room or at a meeting, or we might even be connected on LinkedIn or Facebook. But my friends text me because they have my phone number. My friends, even if they can't remember my kids' names, they know how many I have and the sexes of my friends. They know about my grandchildren. My friends know when I'm sick. We celebrate each other's birthdays. We travel together. We are in each other's homes. Let's be real about what a friend is. Somebody you work with and pretty much everything you do is work related or just before or just after work is not your friend. That's a person you know and you work with, and if that job ended, if they left or you left, you would have nothing else to do with them. That's not your friend. So, get some diversity in your life. Make sure your kids are having diversity in your life, that they have books with people of other colors and not colors, ethnicities, genders, ages, countries. Just expose them to the real world, the world beyond the little bubbles that so many of us are living in, that allow us to go out into the broader lanes of life and say we don't see things because we have the blinders on from our upbringing and from our own laziness about educating ourselves. If you spend more time watching The Tiger King or The Bachelorette than you have learning about Black history, that can change now. If you spent more time doing that than you have learning about bias and needed policing reforms that everyone will benefit, I think, as I said earlier, I am a huge fan of law enforcement. You'll see pictures of me all over the place with law enforcement, me working hand in hand with them supporting my Drop the Drugs nonprofit, me supporting them, and that's not going to stop. But if there are bad people in society doing bad things, I want them punished. If there are bad cops in law enforcement doing bad things, the same thing should happen. There have to be consequences. That's what's stopping a lot of us from just going out doing whatever we want to. Stealing, running over people, punching people, whatever we want to. We know there are going to be consequences. And if we have to legislate, dictate, mandate humane treatment, doing the right thing, picking the best candidates, not ignoring someone or someone's application or throwing it in the trash because of their name or their zip code. Best candidate does not mean an ethnicity. Best candidate is best, and I've been in the room where the best candidate was about to be overlooked because of an implicit bias. And if other people don't recognize it, then please, you speak up and say, wait a minute, something's missing here. We're missing a voice. We're missing an opportunity. This female, this person of color, it's not going to be put like that, but you're there. You are there. We're 12% of the population. You're in places I can never get to because America's not going to change 200% in the few years I have left. You're there when the jokes are told. You're there when the remarks are made at dinner. You're there when children say things they've overheard. It's time to stand up. It's time to speak up. It's time to be part of the change we need globally, and join the peaceful protest, verbally, physically, spiritually. And I'm not just talking about how I feel. I've spent this past month looking at videos, watching programs, listening to people say things I didn't agree with, but I learned some, and it helped me to be able to help others when they ask me questions, when they've reached out to me as their Black friend, wanting to know what can I do, because I needed to understand why they hadn't seen this whole time. It seemed very willful to me, but I am learning things about all sides of this topic, how police officers feel being put in this position of having to, in some cases, defend policies that they don't necessarily agree with or carry out orders. I saw a 74-year-old senior be pushed to the ground by law enforcement, and this was a white guy. Pushed to the ground, started bleeding out of his ear, and he seemed to just be trying to ask a question or make a point. It was horrifying. It was horrifying. And as I understand it, when the people who did it were disciplined, there was a protest. That can't be okay. Just pushing an elderly man to the ground, that can't be okay. We got to be a better America than that. We have to be. We have to be. I just believe that's all I got left. It's just that irrational hope beyond our reason that we are better than this. So if you're interested, if you're still listening, I don't believe that this is an either or proposition. Either you support law enforcement or you don't. Either you support African Americans or you support white people. Either you're for looting or you're against. Nobody's for looting. That's a bad example, but we've got to be the generation of both. You can do both. You can have friends of diverse types. You can support law enforcement and politicians and still treat people humanely, treat people equally, love other people as you love yourself. You can speak up when you see injustice and bias and discrimination, and really and truly to be an ally in this fight against racism, to help Black America get back on stable footing and start to heal. You've got to be educated about the history, the long, long history of racism in all the systems of America and how it got in our blood. And it's been in there so long that we're accustomed to it in many ways. And only now and again, when something erupts, do we realize how sick we are, how sick we've become. I want us to work together on making a better America, on healing America, on our individual and collective wellness. So at the end, or in the notes of this podcast, you're going to see links to just a small portion of the numerous videos and articles that I've looked at. I've also read books, but those lists are out there. This I've kind of culled from a larger pool of information. If you're Christian, there's a great talk, Bishop T.D. Jakes speaking with some leading white pastors about race in the church. There's a YouTube video from the Bible Project, Justice Explained Through Scripture, and it's not all biblical, but that's my basis. That's my do unto others. That's my source. That's the root. There's a great animated video that's good for students on historic racism. There's a video from BBC.com. They're doing a great job overseas. Numerous sources to give historical context, better than what I'm seeing over here in some cases, quite frankly, to help understand systemic racism in the United States. And there's a really neat article on bias in the media coverage of African Americans. One of the things, and I've been a journalist for a major daily, I'm a writer, but this is how deep this goes. This journalist was talking about how she has to argue with her editor about including African Americans' names in the article's title. It'll say, first black graduate of this, or first black police lieutenant, and not their name. And she wants to include the person's name to make this be a personal thing, a human thing, and not just look at this anomaly. They did something no one else can do. It's how that can come across and be perceived. And she just talks about many examples of bias in media coverage, things that are subtle and covert that we might not notice if it's not pointed out to us, like racism for some people, if it's not pointed out to them. And once you see, you cannot unsee. So check out those links. Share with me if you've got some information you'd like me to pass on. I am certainly not saying, nor do I think, that every white person or every non-black person is racist. That has not been my experience. That hasn't been the experience of Black American. I'm not presuming to speak for everyone, but whether it's the Underground Railroad or living through Jim Crow or the Civil Rights Movement, it's never been a completely black thing, which I just got an image in my mind of the Mennonites protesting. We're going to have to do this together, but we need a game plan. And we need to start with the same foundation, with the same understanding. We know our objective, but we need to back up. Clearly, we need to back up and understand how we got here. So I thank you for the efforts you're making and the role you're taking in making this nation, this world, a better, safer place to live for everyone. And just know that now that you've seen, you cannot unsee. We need your help. Listen with your heart. Educate yourself. And when opportunity presents itself, stand up and speak up. Please. Thank you.